Unknown. Unknown. Introduction to Fahrenheit 4, 5-1 by Ray Bradbury. Imagine a world where books are illegal. A world where firemen don't put out fires, they start them. Their mission is simple. Burn every book, erase every dangerous idea, and eliminate the past. This is the world of Fahrenheit 451, a chilling vision of the future written by Ray Bradbury in 1953. The story is not just about censorship. It is about a society that has willingly abandoned knowledge, curiosity, and independent thought. People are not forced to stop reading. They simply choose distractions over wisdom, comfort over truth. At the center of this world is Guy Montag, a fireman who has spent his life burning books. He's good at his job. He never asks questions. Until one day, something happens. A conversation, a moment, a spark, something that makes him wonder, what if books aren't the enemy? What if everything he knows is a lie? This is the story of a man who wakes up in a world that wants him to stay asleep. A world that fears ideas more than war, truth more than fire. A world where thinking is dangerous and ignorance is safety. Let's step into the flames and see what happens when a fireman decides to question everything. Chapter 1. The Fireman. Guy Montag loved his job. The smell of kerosene, the roar of the flames, the sight of books turning to ash. It was all a pleasure. He never wondered why books had to be burned. He never thought about what was inside them. His job was to destroy, not to question. Montag lived in a world that did not encourage questions. It was a fast-paced, loud, and artificial world, filled with giant TV walls, constant noise, and shallow entertainment. Nobody read, nobody thought deeply, nobody cared about the past. Thinking was dangerous. Ignorance was bliss. After work one evening, as he walked home in the dark, Montag met a girl named Clarice McClellan. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. She did not rush. She did not drown in distractions. She simply observed the world around her. Her eyes were bright, curious, full of life. As they walked, she asked him a simple question. "Are you happy?" The question stuck with him. It was a ridiculous thing to ask. Of course he was happy, wasn't he? That night, at home, Montag's world felt different. His house was cold. His wife, Mildred, lay in bed staring at the glowing TV walls, lost in her artificial world. She barely spoke to him. Their conversations were empty. Their connection, non-existent. When he tried to remember how they met, he couldn't. Then something even stranger happened. Mildred overdosed on sleeping pills. Not intentionally, just carelessly. A medical team arrived, pumped out her stomach, replaced her blood, and left. No emotion, no concern. To them, it was routine. Suicide was common in this world where people felt nothing. The next morning, Mildred had no memory of what had happened. She went back to her TV shows, back to her distractions, as if nothing had changed. But something had changed in Montag. He found himself looking for Clarice. She asked him questions nobody else asked. She spoke about a time before books were burned, about people who actually talked to each other, who thought about life. She told him about a world he had never imagined. And then, suddenly, she was gone. One day, she wasn't there. Her family had disappeared. Something inside Montag cracked. He had to know more. And then came the night that changed everything. A fire alarm rang, another book burning, another routine job. But this time, something was different. When Montag and his crew arrived at the house, they found an old woman surrounded by books. But she did not run. She did not beg. She simply stood among the pages, refusing to leave. They doused her books in kerosene. Montag hesitated. For the first time in his life, he felt something. Doubt. And then, as the flames began to rise, the woman lit a match and set herself on fire. She burned with her books. The firemen left, but Montag couldn't forget. Why would someone die for books? What was inside them? What was so important that it was worth burning for? As he walked home, he realized something horrifying. He had stolen a book. Chapter 2. The Awakening. Montag hid the book under his pillow, his hands shaking. He had never held a book before, never touched the forbidden. It felt heavier than it should, as if it carried a weight beyond its pages. For days he was restless. The book burned in his mind more than any fire ever had. He found himself staring at the TV walls, at Mildred's empty face, at the meaningless conversations around him. He saw his world for what it was: shallow, lifeless, controlled. Unable to contain his growing curiosity, Montag reached out to Faber, a retired English professor he had once met, a man who had lived in the time before books were banned, a man who remembered. When Montag visited Faber, the old man was terrified. He had spent years in hiding, pretending to be just another obedient citizen. But when Montag showed him the book, Faber's fear turned to hope. Together they hatched a plan, a dangerous one. They would resist. Faber gave Montag a secret earpiece, allowing them to communicate. Montag would return to the firehouse, act normal, and wait for the right moment. But Montag was changing. He couldn't pretend anymore. At home, he confronted Mildred and her friends, women who spent their lives drowning in television, gossip, and soma-like distractions. In a moment of desperation, he read a poem to them. Real words, real emotion. The women were horrified. One began to cry. Another grew angry. Real feelings were too much to bear. Mildred was terrified. She called the firehouse. She turned in her own husband. Moments later, the fire alarm rang. Montag raced to the station, his mind spinning. And then he saw the address on the screen. It was his own house. He arrived with the other firemen, standing in front of his own front door as Captain Beatty, his superior, his mentor, the man who had always believed in the system, handed him a flamethrower. Burn it down, Montag. His hands trembled. His house, his memories, his past, all about to be turned to ash. And Beatty was watching, waiting, daring him to resist. In that moment, Montag realized there was no turning back. The real fire had just begun. Chapter 3. The Chase. Montag stood frozen, the flamethrower heavy in his hands. His house, his past, his memories, his lies, all of it was about to be reduced to ash. Captain Beatty stood before him, calm, watching, waiting. "Burn it down, Montag," he ordered. Montag hesitated, but the choice had already been made for him. He had stepped too far, asked too many questions, and now there was no way back. With a deep breath, he pulled the trigger. Flames roared to life, swallowing his home, his possessions, everything he had once thought defined him. The fire consumed the TV walls where Mildred had spent her days, the bed they had shared in silence, the sterile comfort of a life that was never truly lived. But Beatty wasn't satisfied. He stepped forward, taunting Montag. "You were always a fool, Montag. Books won't save you. They'll ruin you." Something in Montag snapped. He turned the flamethrower on Beatty. In an instant, the captain was engulfed in fire, his screams lost in the deafening roar of destruction. The other firemen stood in shock, too stunned to react. Montag didn't wait. He ran. He sprinted through the darkened streets, his mind racing faster than his feet. He had killed a man. He had broken every law. The government would not let him escape. The mechanical hound, the cold, relentless enforcer of the fire department, was already being unleashed. It was programmed to track down rebels like him, to inject them with a paralyzing poison. The city itself seemed to be turning against him. Every screen on every building flashed with his name, his face. Fugitive alert, Guy Montag, dangerous, armed, wanted for murder. The citizens, once oblivious and uninterested in reality, were suddenly enthralled. The chase had become a show. The people who never read books, who never questioned their world, now watched his downfall with fascination. Montag ran to Faber's house, desperate for help. The old professor took one look at him and knew. There was no saving Montag now. "You have to leave," Faber whispered. "Go to the river. Follow it out of the city. There are others like you, living beyond the ruins." Montag nodded. He handed Faber some of the stolen books, knowing the old man would keep them safe. Then, without another word, he ran again. The mechanical hound was close. Montag could hear its metal legs skittering against the pavement, its sniffing sensors searching for him. He had minutes, maybe seconds. He reached the river. Without hesitation, he threw himself into the water, letting the current pull him away, away from the flames, away from the city, away from everything he had known. As he floated, breathless, staring up at the endless sky, one thought consumed him. He was finally free. Chapter 4. The Book People. The river carried Montag far from the city, its waters washing away the heat, the ashes, the fear. The mechanical world he had known faded behind him, swallowed by darkness. For the first time in his life, he was surrounded by silence. When he finally reached the shore, he climbed onto solid ground, exhausted. The air smelled different here, clean, untouched. The artificial glow of the city was a distant memory, replaced by the quiet hum of wind through trees and the chirping of unseen creatures. He walked for miles, his body aching but his mind racing. Where was he? Was he truly free? Or was the hound still tracking him, waiting for the right moment to strike? Then, in the distance, he saw a fire. Not a destructive, raging blaze, but a small, controlled flame, warming a group of men who sat around it. Montag approached cautiously. One of them, a man with wise eyes and a calm demeanor, stood up and greeted him. "Welcome, we've been expecting you." His name was Granger, and he was the leader of a hidden community of outcasts, the Book People. They were former scholars, professors, and intellectuals who had escaped the world state's destruction of knowledge. They had no books, but they carried something even more valuable, the words inside them. Each of them had memorized entire books. They were living libraries. Granger explained their mission: to preserve knowledge, to pass it down through spoken word until the world was ready for books again. They had no illusions of grandeur. They were not an army, not a rebellion, but a seed waiting for the right soil. Montag, shaken but awed, realized he had found what he had been searching for. He was no longer alone. He had a purpose. Then, in the distance, the city exploded. A blinding flash lit up the sky, followed by a deafening roar. The world state had gone to war, and now it was over in an instant. The city Montag had once called home was nothing but dust. The men watched in silence. There was nothing to say. Finally, Granger spoke. "Come on, we have work to do." And as they walked, Montag realized this was not the end. This was the beginning. Final thoughts. Fahrenheit 451 is not just a story about censorship. It is a warning about a world where people choose ignorance over truth, where distraction replaces deep thought, where comfort is prioritized over knowledge. Montag's journey is one of awakening. He starts as a man who destroys knowledge without question, but by the end, he becomes a guardian of it. He learns that true freedom comes not from obedience, but from the ability to think, to question, to seek meaning beyond entertainment and blind conformity. Bradbury's message is clear. A society does not fall because books are burned. It falls because people stop reading them. As Montag and the book people walk toward an uncertain future, they carry with them the hope that one day, the world will be ready to listen again. And maybe, just maybe, they will rebuild something better. If you enjoyed this adaptation, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more classic book summaries in just 40 minutes. Check out our other audiobook summaries and rediscover the most important books of all time.